Hi, everyone, and welcome to the book launch of Here's Plenty by David Radovich. And it's so nice to have everybody here tonight to celebrate with him. And I just want to say a few words about David. He's the author of two narrative collections, American Bound, an epic for our time, and America Abroad, an epic of discovery. Among his lyric volumes are Slain Species, By the Way, Poems Over the Years, Greatest Hits, and Canticles, Love's Hours. Other books are Middle East, Mez, The Countries We Live in, and Under the Sun. His plays, both serious and comic, have been performed across the U.S., including six off Broadway and in Europe. He served as the president of the Thomas Wolfe Society, Charlotte Writers Club, and North Carolina Poetry Society, and currently administers the Gilbert Chappell Distinguished Poet Series. And I give you David.
Thank you very much. And thank you all so much for being here. It means a lot to me. Um, my book is, and some of you've already seen it, is called Here's Plenty. And I was born in Boston. I was telling Gloria, her press is headquartered in near Boston, Somerville. Um, and I've lived in a lot of different locations, 8 different states and 3 other countries. But I married the South. And I've lived full time in Charlotte for over 15 years. And this is my book about the South. I've varied the themes from different books. And so this is a book I've been wanting to write for a while. And the prevailing metaphor is the Garden of Eden. So I have a number of references, poems about gardens. And the very first poem takes place in Eve's Garden, which is a real place at Polly's Island. Um, so that's the theme, and I was delighted. I'll tell you after the reading, I can tell you how I got this beautiful um, image of apples for the cover. I was really delighted to find that. But let me start by reading a couple poems about the South. Um, the first section is about the South as a region and as a theme. One of the things I love about the South is this wonderful tradition of storytelling. There are great storytellers in the South. I lived for a number of years in the Midwest, and the men in the Midwest are very laconic. It's yep, nope, very restrained. But in the South, both men and women love to tell stories, and they're convoluted stories. And of course, Southern fiction is absolutely wonderful. So this poem is called Storytelling. How come all my friends speak in novels, some of them published, with great sprawling plots and characters who claw into your mind, returning from war, betrayals and sex scenes and tragic regrets, and more than enough twists to overturn a house? Beginning, middle, flashback, restart, end. My sort merely stroll along the sand, thinking on tides and time, relations that might have been, and God, and maybe turtles who just now are turning beachward to lay their sudden eggs. And I should have said beforehand, but I'll say now that um, much as I admire the Southern fiction, I'm a little bit jealous as a poet because we don't get the publicity or the support that fiction writers do. Um, and so when I said my sort merely stroll along the sand, that's poets. But I was happy that a friend of mine recently read this poem and he said, "Oh, the sudden eggs are poems." So I'm glad he caught that. Um, the the big snake in the Garden of Eden, which is the South, of course, is slavery. And some years ago, I went to Clarksville, Mississippi for a Tennessee Williams conference, and I went out to the former slave cabins and looked around there. This poem is called Slave Quarters in Mississippi. This is where they kept their chattel, where hail on the tin roofs felt like a pale echo of the real torture. No chains in sight, but no beds, rotting wood, windows boarded up, smell of damned living, sunbaked in the humid walls. Tourists can now visit like ghosts, stroll through the gates, even stay the night, and leave with the wind clutching their phones. Somewhere near, a loved one was sold, like an arm, a leg ripped off, for the fields of the always reborn. Grief doesn't recognize colors or flags or slogans or an afternoon of eyes walking in shame. And it's true, they fixed up a couple of these slave cabins and you can go spend the night there if you wish. I'm not sure I would want to, but it is possible. Um, it's been in Charlotte, like maybe it's been I can't remember. It's been seems like 7 or 8 years since we had a real snow, proper snow, like you get in many other parts of the country. But about 10 years ago now, we had two big snowstorms in the space of a few days, and I wrote this poem. And I should also say that my daughter, Leela, who's here tonight, um, is a lawyer, and she was for 17 years the head lawyer at the Charlotte Douglas Airport. And one day, a lawyer friend of hers came to her and said, "I bet there nobody has used the word notwithstanding in a poem." Well, you can imagine. I see lots of poets here tonight. You can imagine that's like waving a red flag, isn't it? A challenge to use the word notwithstanding in a poem. Well, this poem uses 8 legal terms including the title. And the title is Legal Cession, Cession, which means to cede legally, to give up legally to from one party to another. So this is legal cession. Notwithstanding the 8-inch snowfall, my back is sore and humorless. Heretofore, I found it manly to tough out the shovel, lift nature to one side, and arrange white artfully along trim rows. Thereunto did I suffer from vigorous man's delusion, which appertaining, I now cede, mens incorpore, to the alieny of youthful exuberance. Hereinafter shall the neighbor boy who came knocking earlier assume all future rights and responsibilities to the aforesaid snow, ice, and vertebrae. So you might not be surprised to know that this was published in the Journal of the John Jay Law School in New York. So I think it was a perfect one for the law folks. Um, I have in every book I have a section on um, social issues, and this I thought I'd follow up on that one and read this poem about climate change. Climate change. This year, all the trees and flowers bloomed early. They make a mockery of time, and the sky is not ready. Pollen floats in the air before noses can be cleared and Kleenexes bought. Even love has to catch up. Bees scramble ahead of rain. Birds call somehow bewildered in the woods. If this is always, we're in trouble. Spring will burn our nostrils and the moon will turn orange before any fall, before any harvest. Um, we've heard a lot lately about immigrants, migrants, immigrants. Um, this next poem is about a scene I witnessed here in Charlotte at a refugee center. And I will also say, many, you're all, I think most of you are familiar with Michelangelo's statue, the Pietà in Rome at St. Peter's. Mary is holding the body of Jesus. This is called Pieto at a refugee center. His face is poised as an olive, holding his toffee-haired girl for life, for dear life. In a hand-picked suit and tie, he looks sad beyond relief, yet calm as silk, soft beyond the waters. What tortures have they endured? What barbed wire, what gunfire, what walking into hate and fear. Unmistakable across a crowded room. Here they cradle in tight memory a sculpture carved in living flesh. That's what it looked like to look at them. Last week was Valentine's Day, so I thought I should read a sort of love poem. In all my books, I try to have a section on love or relationships, at least of one kind or another. This poem is called Visitation. I never put much faith in angels. I guess it's the wings, the false flying, the too good to be true wishes fulfilled by supernatural agency. Blood always seemed better, and body parts that ran and scraped their knees on merry-go-rounds. Darkness that grappled fears to headstone, eyes that dreamt. But lately, here you've been, ever present, hardly flying, still as embers, steady as rain. I can only ask you to inhabit me. Um, I have the glorious good fortune of being a grandfather, which I recommend to everybody. Being a grandparent is a wonderful thing. Um, and you can, of course, be grandparent to nieces and nephews and, as well. Um, when my the twin granddaughters are now 15 and a half, and they're fully grown and into all kinds of interesting things. When they were 2, 3, and 4, and about the age, Wes, of your son, we lived in a tri-level house with lots of stairs, and they loved one at a time climbing on my shoulders and having me run around the house, um, up and down the stairs, around the bed, around the sofa, running all around. And we did this for several years until they got so big. And one day I pulled my shoulder, and that was the end of that phase. But it was a good time. And this poem is the source of the title of the book. Granddaughters write. She grabs my body as if it were her own, which of course it is. To grab, hug, poke, or ride on round the shoulders of the house, upstairs, behind sofas, weaving like a fervent fish or galloping giraffe, high and holy, then ultimate collapse in giggles and not a few eggs. That can only mean life is plenty. And I'm going to end my part of the reading with a poem. We live in a very troubling time. This is a very stressful time. And I thought I would end on this poem called Offering. Offering. From one day to the next seems a difference between drought and flood, corporations and the poor. Should we pack our suitcase for the future? We bend over gardenias in the backyard, salvia, rosemary, daylilies just now blazing, wondering if nature can withstand our age. sun fighting with wind and rain, wars consuming everything we believe. Time to visit the cemetery. Bring the pure lilies we picked this morning as our offering to the dead. We owe them our knees and this stab at continuing, paying homage to names and all that's green. Thank you. This is sampling of the book. And while I'm at it, I think I'll tell a little story about the cover photo. Some of you've seen it. It's lots of apples. Um, Gloria had sent me a picture that she suggested I put on the cover, and I just didn't think it felt right. And she said, "Well, you can go to this website and pick something that you think is appropriate." So I went on the website and I found this image of apples. I wanted I wanted a sense of plenitude for this book called Here's Plenty, and I love the idea of the apples since we're talking about the Garden of Eden. So I found this picture, and it turned out I hunted down the photographer, and it turns out that the photographer lives in a small town in Baden-Württemberg, Germany, not far from where I used to live when I had two Fulbright lectureships back in the early days. So I thought, oh, this is providential, and I'm really happy with it. And Gloria did absolutely fabulous job of picking up the colors of that on the cover. So anyway, thank you all for listening. I hope you can unmute now and people can converse or ask questions, raise comments, anything.
Well, I'll say something because I also have grandkids and I've tried repeatedly writing poems about them. And I find it very difficult to toe the line between, I don't know, sentiment, I guess, and capturing what it is. And I loved your poem. I wondered if you ran into that same problem and if you have any comments on how to capture that relationship with the grandkids.
Well, oh, that's hard. I've written seven or eight at least poems about them, and I think that's a problem really generally if you're writing about family members, not to shade into too much sentimentality somehow. And I think the trick is to give yourself a little distance, maybe, and work on the shape of the poem so that that gives you a little bit of detachment. Um, I don't know if that helps.
Well, I also find that they say things that are sort of irresistibly poetic. Do you ever put their voice actually into the poems?
Yes, sometimes. Yeah. I think kids are naturally poetic, and they stay poetic till maybe they hit their teen years, and then they get it pounded out of them somehow or other. And it's hard sometimes to get adults interested in poetry again, but kids have a love of language and playing with words. Hi, Bob. Nice to see you.
Hi, sorry, I was out doing things and
That,
got back late.
that's okay.
I'd like to say that I really admired the spareness and the plain language that carried so much emotional freight. And I was quite moved by your work and appreciate your craft.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll offer that I did watch the trailer and it's a really good tease. So I'm looking forward to seeing the book.
David, I noticed that you said a couple of times that you usually include this or that and as a section in the poem, like the love poems. Can you talk some about how you construct how you curate a collection of poems? I would love to hear the method behind your madness.
Hey, well, that's a great question. Um, it's interesting. I think of a book of poems. I don't think of a book of poems as just here are a lot of poems. I don't think that for me that doesn't work. And I've seen some books of poems by people that had a lot of nice poems in it, but it didn't have a shape to it. And I think of it as a kind of a piece of music, a symphony, if you will, um, and that has movements. And I typically will, in a full-length book, I will have something like 4, 5, or 6 sections, and I want to have a flow to it. Um, so there might be a part of poems about gardening or more local things. I include a section on social issues and love and relationship poems um, and then I also like to always have a prevailing metaphor that governs the book as a whole. It doesn't necessarily uh, enter every poem, but one of my books is called "The Countries We Live In," and I wanted to explore the different geographies, and I don't mean just living in Idaho or Boston or wherever, but I have poems in there about cancer and the landscape of disease, or the landscape, love as a kind of landscape, or the geography of um, poverty, or something like that. And so that book was about um, the landscapes of different parts of our lives. Um, this one I wanted to explore plenty and the garden, that image of fertility. The South is such a fertile part of the country. And I explored that. And of course, there are various snakes in the garden too, so one has to deal with those as well. So I like to find a metaphor that somehow resides. I have a new book of poems I'm working on called Into the Waves, and it explores all the different kinds of water and waves, not only of water, but also waves of history, maybe waves of dying, waves of. So that's sort of how I think about it. And I'm a real fan, by the way. I don't know if any of you are, the symphonies of Anton Bruckner, the Austrian composer, and um, and so his symphonies have. So you have typical in the symphony would be to have an allegro first movement, a slow andante movement, maybe for the second movement, and the third movement is usually a dance-like scherzo or rondo, and then um, the concluding movement is another allegro. So that you have a flow of energy that's sometimes slower, sometimes faster.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you so much for that
Yeah.
wonderful answer because I hadn't really thought about pulling a collection together in that way. And that's beautiful. What a great, the symphony
Thank you.
itself as a metaphor is wonderful. Thank you.
Well, and let me also say, and I'm not going to name this person because I really love this poet, but I have a woman I know, and she put together her selected poems and selected poems from different years, and she puts all the poems randomly together for the whole book. So the new ones, the old ones, and so on. And I didn't find that satisfying because one of the things I like about the selected poems when you get is when you have a poet who's published, say, 8 or 10 books of poems, I like to see the growth and development of this is what they were writing in the middle period or what they were going through during this phase. So part of the pleasure as a reader of selected poems is seeing how the poet grows and develops. And I felt like I was deprived of that.
Mm.
David, have you ever written a book of poems that's a narrative?
Yes, I have written two what I call epics. One is called America Bound, and it covers and well, I'll come back to that in a minute. And it covers it focuses on it's set in the Midwest along the Mississippi River, and it's about um, America from the end of World War II up to the war in Iraq. And it's a set of dramatic monologues that of everyday Americans describing their experience, and it has black characters, white characters, men, women, different ages, and they tell the story of American history during that period, with a lot of focus on the wars from World War II, Vietnam, War of Iraq. The other epic I've done is called um, America Abroad, which is really starts very, very early with the very founding of the United States up into the space age. And it's about America and Americans who've gone out. Well, it's about all kinds of characters who come into America, but also people who've gone out to China, East Asia, South America, and so on. So it's a very expansive one. And in that particular one, um, I have dramatic monologues from people like Sacagawea, Coronado, Ponce de Leon, sort of classic figures, Betsy Ross, and they tell their stories. Um, so those are fun. They're basically telling the story of America, two different stories of America and their narrative. And also, I would say from time to time, I write poems that are little stories.
Thank you.
But I'll follow up on that. I've written a lot of plays, and I wrote a poem the other day. A lot of my poems will take place in a scene. And I guess the Pietà was a good example. Like you're in the room and you're seeing this scene unfold. So that you have, and other people do this too. Obviously, there's a little play going on in the poem where people are interacting. Hmm. Yeah. Any other comments, reactions?
David, this is probably a typical question, but how long did it take you to write Here's Plenty?
Well, I think I probably spent 7 or 8 years um, pulling together the poems and about half of them were published in journals, something like that. So I'm sending poems out and shaping it, revising it. Um, so each one of my books, I usually take a number of years on it.
So I have a question. When you do that, when you start writing, do you do that as an eye toward publishing, or do you just start writing the poems and submitting them?
I don't think of a book in advance usually. Um, I'm except for the epics. The epics I planned ahead. But like in America Bound, that's the epic of basically a kind of war epic from World War II to the war in Iraq. And I have three generations, and so the children and the grandchildren of the first characters are telling their stories later on. But usually I just write lots and lots and lots of poems, and then you see which ones kind of coalesce together around some kind of theme. They seem to fit together. Um, and then they gradually coalesce into a book. And it's hard sometimes because you may write an absolutely wonderful poem and it just doesn't fit in this book, or um, and I don't like to force it into a book if it doesn't feel like it fits there.
But when you wrote your epics, I just was wondering where you did your research or how you did your research for it, or did you do research for it, or
Absolutely.
what?
Oh, I had to. I
Yeah.
had to. Um, I have to always do research. The epic that I wrote from World War II to the war in Iraq, I have 18 characters. The main body of it is 18 characters, and these are everyday people. Um, and telling 24 different stories in different time frames. But I have to, if it's a person, and they're not me, these are not me. So it means that I have to get to know these characters, and I have to live with these characters for quite a while. And the more different than they are from me, the more work I have to do. Um, and for instance, I have three generations of Black Americans, Black male Americans. One served in Europe, and the son served in Vietnam, and the grandson is pursuing his MBA. Um, and uh, and I had the one that went to Vietnam. I had a friend named Sterling, and I borrowed from him, um, this Black friend, and I invented a lot of things, but I borrowed from that. So you borrow from people you know, and that kind of thing. Now for the America Abroad, where I talk about Coronado and Sacagawea and so on, I had to do a lot of research on that, and find out about all kinds of historical events that I didn't know a lot about. So there was a lot of work in that.
Thank you. I've just always been really interested in persona poems, and I
Mm.
find that interesting. The research is almost more enticing sometimes than the writing for for me.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. It was lovely.
Yes. Well, I think that grows out of I really started writing drama before I wrote poetry. And so I'm very interested, and part of it I find my own personality boring. So it's honestly, so I like taking on the personalities of other people, or at least I just imagine them. And so I think I write a lot of persona poems. I think they're very interesting to do.
That was going to be my question, was how does writing plays inform your writing of poetry, and how does your work with poetry inform your plays writing?
Well, I think the plays come in, first of all, in writing dramatic monologues. Um, and I guess it's gutsy. I wrote a poem the other day from the point of view of a man in Gaza right now. And you could say that's appropriation, but it was a persona poem of what it might feel like to be there now. And I think that's probably, I do that probably to avoid delivering a rant. Uh, I mean, otherwise I would just be ranting, but if I channel it into a persona poem, I can come up with something that means more. Um, and a lot of my poems do have a setting where things happen, or you see, and you have characters who interact. Um, so, and moving the other way, my plays are rather poetic, some of them more than others. But in some plays, I have this one play where I have a Greek chorus of three women who are very poetic, and they're interspersed like a Greek. It's a drama. It's not a tragedy, but it's and so I borrow uh, poetic elements for the plays as well.
Well, then thank you so much for
Thank you for
coming
coming,
tonight.
everybody.
Yeah,
I
and
really
the book, here
appreciate
it
it.
is.
Great to see you all.